The morning had begun in the usual haze of exhaust fumes and footsteps. Amara Carter moved through the gleaming corridors of the Sterling Heights luxury galleria with practiced grace, mop and cleaning supplies in tow. She'd long learned how to disappear in plain sight, how to become an invisible presence in the spaces where wealth and privilege pooled. The corridors were all marble floors, crystal lighting, and delicate echoes of designer heels against stone, and Amara's world lived just beneath those footsteps. Her hands were already raw from scrubbing, nails trimmed short, hair tucked under a plain navy headscarf, as store managers barely acknowledged her existence. She was 29, with skin the color of polished mahogany and eyes too sharp for the world she'd been assigned to clean. Most days she kept her head down, her mind drifting to the degrees she'd once dreamed of, to the applications that had never earned her a reply. Sterling Heights was both prison and livelihood, and she endured it because it fed her younger sister and paid the rent for their crumbling apartment in Prospect Terrace. This morning, though, the sky was heavy with rain, a cold gray downpour that turned the city's streets to slick ribbons of black water. Amara had already mopped twice before noon, fighting to keep the boutique entrances pristine. That's when she arrived. Genevieve Cross. Blonde, expensively dressed, and imperious in a way only the truly spoiled could manage. She was a minor celebrity in Manhattan's social circuit, the only child of Lawrence Cross, a man whose last name appeared on half the skyscrapers in Midtown. Genevieve didn't walk so much as glide, trailed by a pair of sycophantic friends in equally absurdly priced coats. Amara saw them coming and moved instinctively to the side of the entryway, head down, cloth in hand, praying to avoid notice. The last thing she needed was to catch the eye of one of the city's chosen daughters, but fate wasn't in a merciful mood that morning. Genevieve spotted her just as her chauffeur-driven black Range Rover pulled up to the curb, splashing through a deep, oily puddle. And for reasons known only to those raised believing the world existed for their amusement, Genevieve paused, locked eyes with Amara, and smiled. A cold, cruel smile. "Watch this," Genevieve drawled to her friends, just loud enough for the cleaner to hear. She gestured to the driver. The tires spun deliberately into the puddle. A wave of filthy water surged up, splattering across Amara's legs, soaking her faded work pants, dirtying her shirt, and flecking her face with mud. The cold hit like a slap. Around them, the few patrons and boutique clerks on the sidewalk gave nervous, scandalized laughs. One of Genevieve's friends took out a phone, capturing a photo of Amara's drenched, stunned figure. "Oops," Genevieve chirped, pretending surprise, her face a mask of manufactured innocence. "Guess someone should watch where they're standing." Laughter. Harsh, unkind, indifferent. Amara's first instinct was to turn and leave, to vanish into the recesses of the service corridor, dry off in a janitor's closet, and let the humiliation wash away in private. She could almost feel the burning gaze of the passers-by settling on her skin like a second coat of mud. Her pulse thundered in her ears, but something rooted her in place. Maybe it was the smirk on Genevieve's face. Maybe it was the way no one moved to defend her. Or maybe it was the sheer, exhausting weight of all the small humiliations she'd swallowed over the years. A lifetime of knowing the rules of proximity, of silence, of survival. She lifted her chin. Genevieve's expression faltered for half a second, startled by the defiance in those eyes, but quickly replaced it with a sneer. "You people are so sensitive," she added under her breath as she turned and disappeared into the designer store. Amara's stomach churned. Her skin was clammy, sticky with mud, her pride stinging far worse than her soaked clothes. She stooped to gather the scattered supplies she'd dropped and reached for the cleaning cloth that had fallen in the puddle. Around her, the murmuring resumed, people moving on, indifferent to the scene. Except one. Parked a discreet distance from the curb, half obscured by the angle of a tinted window, sat a sleek, obsidian black town car. The window had lowered an inch during the incident, though no one noticed. And behind that window, a pair of sharp, watchful eyes had witnessed every moment. The man inside said nothing, his expression unreadable. his face shadowed by the low-hanging clouds outside. He made a single short call on his phone. A name, a location, an instruction. The window rolled silently back up. Amara, unaware of the gaze, gathered herself and resumed her duties. Her heart weighed heavier than the mop in her hands, but she forced herself back into motion. Because that was what you did in this city. You carried your dignity in your spine when you couldn't afford it in your pocket. She didn't yet know that her life had just been noticed by someone no one in that mall would ever dare cross. And soon, very soon, the balance of power would shift. If this story of injustice and transformation moved you, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more stories that turn pain into power. The limousine's cabin was a cocoon of quiet, the world outside reduced to a blur of raindrops streaking against tinted glass. Inside, Victor Ellison watched the scene unravel with the kind of calm born of long observation. At 52, Victor was a man accustomed to making and unmaking fortunes with a phone call. A man whose name rarely appeared in papers, yet carried more weight in Manhattan's underbelly than the entire Cross family combined. The moment the mud splashed against the cleaner's legs, Victor's gaze narrowed. He wasn't surprised by Genevieve Cross's petty cruelty. Wealth without wisdom often festered into malice. What struck him was the girl's response. The sharp, defiant tilt of her chin in the face of a humiliation designed to reduce. The restraint, the dignity, the very thing Victor had spent a lifetime admiring in those the world tried to crush. He pressed a button on the console. "Cole," he said, and within seconds his driver's voice came through the intercom. "Yes, sir. Who's the girl?" "I'll find out." Discreetly. "Full work history, family, anything we can learn before sunset." "Yes, sir." Victor ended the call and sat back, watching as Genevieve's Range Rover roared away down Fifth Avenue, indifferent to the wake it left behind. There was something particularly satisfying, he mused, about watching people at their most entitled, unaware they were being weighed and measured. His mind flicked back to a conversation from months ago, a meeting with a group of urban redevelopment investors, where Lawrence Cross had boasted of his daughter's upcoming charity gala, a vanity project designed to wash the family name clean after a string of quiet lawsuits and business scandals. Victor hadn't cared then. But now, something about the moment, about that girl standing in muddy water with the defiance of a queen in exile, changed everything. There were rules in this city, rules about who mattered, about who could be humiliated and who could not, about who got away with casual cruelty. Victor had never respected those rules. He believed in power, yes, but power earned, not inherited. He tapped the console again. "Get Marcus from legal and DeWitt from security. I want them in my office within the hour." "Understood, sir." The window rolled up, severing the last view of the luxury mall, but the image of that girl's eyes stayed with him. Amara, still soaked, made her way back to the service corridor, away from the boutiques and designer perfumes, past the racks of expensive clothes, and into the world where no one looked at you twice unless something was wrong. She barely noticed the sidelong glances of fellow workers, more pity than mockery, as she trudged toward the employee locker room. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. A message from her sister Talia. "You okay? Weather's crazy. Text me." Amara hesitated. She could lie, as she usually did, could type back a breezy "fine" and leave it at that. But her fingers hovered over the keys, then dropped to her side. No, not today. She turned the corner, heading instead toward the manager's office. Might as well report the incident, file a complaint, useless as it always was. The last time she tried reporting a wealthy client's harassment, the HR director had politely advised her to be more careful around certain clientele. The time before that, her hours were mysteriously cut. Still, something propelled her forward. Maybe it was exhaustion, or fury, or simply that one drop in an already overfilled cup. But before she could knock, a young security guard stepped into her path. "Amara Carter?" She blinked. "Yeah? You've been asked to report to the executive suite, right now." Her stomach lurched. No cleaner was ever summoned to the executive suite, not unless they were about to be fired or worse. Was this Genevieve Cross flexing her muscle, demanding a termination for the crime of being in the wrong place at the wrong time? Amara's pulse hammered in her throat. Why? The guard shrugged, expression unreadable. Orders. From the top floor. She glanced down at herself, mud-streaked, drenched, smelling of city rain and floor polish. I'm not exactly presentable. Didn't ask for a dress code, the guard said quietly. There was something in his voice then, something that sounded less like indifference and more like warning. Amara nodded, pulse a drumbeat in her ears. The elevator ride was surreal. She'd never been past the third floor, where management offices sat. The penthouse suite was reserved for the unseen owners, those whose names were whispered but faces never shown. The walls inside the elevator gleamed, the mirrored surface reflecting her bedraggled image back at her. A flash of anger burned in her chest. She straightened her shoulders. Whatever this was, she would not cower. As the doors slid open on the top floor, she stepped into a hushed, carpeted corridor, where thick glass windows showed the city skyline blurred by rain. It felt like another planet, removed from the slick streets and soulless service corridors below. A tall, sharp-suited man waited beside an open door. "Miss Carter," he said, gesturing inside. Amara swallowed hard and crossed the threshold. She had no idea what waited for her inside, but she was done walking small. And neither she nor the city knew yet how much would change before the day was out. The office was nothing like Amara had imagined. No cold chrome, no minimalist decor designed to intimidate. Instead, the room exuded quiet, old-money elegance. Dark oak paneling, heavy leather chairs, shelves lined with books whose spines bore gold-embossed titles. A large window stretched across the far wall, the city beyond a gray canvas of rain and glass towers. At the center of it all, behind a broad mahogany desk, sat a man she'd never seen before. Older than she'd expected, his skin a deep brown that spoke of Caribbean roots, his suit impeccably tailored but understated. The kind of man who didn't need to announce his presence to command a room. His face bore the calm of someone who had witnessed 1,000 things more brutal than a splash of mud. Victor Ellison gestured to the seat across from him. "Miss Carter," he said. His voice was deep, steady. "Please sit." Amara hesitated at the threshold. Every instinct screamed at her to be careful, that this was the part of the city where people like her didn't belong, where one wrong word could end a livelihood. But something in the man's gaze stopped her. It wasn't pity or condescension, it was something else. Recognition, maybe. Or curiosity. She crossed the room and sat, conscious of her wet clothes staining the expensive upholstery. She folded her hands in her lap, refusing to apologize for it. Victor studied her for a moment before speaking. "Do you know who I am?" he asked. Amara shook her head. "No, sir. I own Sterling Heights," he said simply, watching her reaction. It landed like a gut punch, the entire mall, the boutiques, the luxury towers connected by sky bridges. The man behind the curtain. She gritted her teeth. "I didn't do anything wrong," she said quietly, though the tremor in her voice betrayed her. "I know," Victor replied. Those two words disarmed her more than any accusation might have. "I saw what happened this morning," he went on. "From my car. Every second of it." Amara's heart stuttered. She sat up straighter, the weight of years of indignities pressing against her ribcage. To be seen, fully, undeniably, wasn't something she was used to. I'm sorry if it caused any disturbance," she began, defaulting to habit, but Victor raised a hand to stop her. "You have nothing to apologize for. It wasn't your disgrace. It was hers." Amara swallowed hard. The silence between them was thick, like the moment before a storm breaks. "You handled yourself well," Victor said. "Better than most would have." "I didn't have much choice," Amara replied, her voice tightening. "People like her don't face consequences. And people like me, we learn to eat the humiliation and get on with it." Victor leaned back, nodding slowly. "I used to clean floors," he said, almost conversationally. The confession caught her off guard. She blinked. 15, back in Bed-Stuy. Mop, bucket, and a boss who called me boy well into my 20s. You learn the same things you did. How to disappear. How to make yourself small so you don't get noticed. Or hit. Or worse. Amara felt the sting behind her eyes before she could stop it. She fought it down. I'm not telling you this for sympathy, Victor continued. I'm telling you because it matters. Because people like Genevieve Cross think the world exists for them. And because every so often life serves them a reckoning. A knock at the door broke the tension. The tall, suited assistant reappeared, carrying a folder. Mr. Ellison. The background check you requested. Victor nodded, taking the folder. He opened it and skimmed a page, then looked up at Amara with a half smile. You've had quite the run, he murmured. 2 jobs, night school credits, medical bills for your sister. Every application for promotions turned down with no reason on file. And yet, not a single complaint against you. Amara stiffened, embarrassed at how naked her life looked on paper. How do you even? Because when men like me see someone like you endure all this and still hold her head up after what happened today, we pay attention. He pushed the folder aside. Do you know what's happening next Saturday night? Amara shook her head, wary. The Cross Foundation's annual charity gala, Victor said. It'll be here, in the atrium. Media, politicians, business leaders, a whole parade of white smiles and double dealing. He leaned forward. And you, Miss Carter, are going to be there. Amara frowned. As what, a cleaner? Victor smiled thinly. As the reason everything changes. He reached into a drawer and pulled out a small flash drive, placing it on the desk. On this, he said, are security camera feeds. Not just today's incident, but the last 5 years of harassment cases, complaints buried by management, racial slurs caught on audio. And something else. A record of the Cross family's embezzlement from this property's employee pension fund, enough to bring the whole gilded empire down. Amara's breath hitched. It was too much, too fast. Why me? Victor's gaze held hers, steady as a promise. Because you didn't flinch, because you've earned it. And because someone like you taking them down means more than someone like me ever could. The room fell silent again. The rain against the window a steady hypnotic drum. Amara reached out, her fingers closing around the flash drive. And for the first time in years, she allowed herself a small, dangerous smile. The hours after the meeting passed in a blur. Amara left the penthouse office with the flash drive tucked into the deepest pocket of her jacket, her soaked clothes still clinging to her skin, though she no longer felt the cold. The service elevator descended floor by floor, the distant murmur of luxury boutiques and orchestral mall music fading into a low, persistent hum. She was no longer invisible, not to herself. As she reached the service corridor, colleagues shot her curious glances, their expressions mixtures of suspicion and confusion. No one asked where she'd been. In a place like Sterling Heights, it wasn't safe to ask. Amara headed straight for the staff locker room, needing a moment to breathe, to process. She leaned against the metal door, head tilted back, staring at the cracked ceiling tiles. Rain still tapped the narrow windows high on the wall. Her phone buzzed again. Talia. Hey, you okay? You're not answering. Call me soon, please. Amara typed a quick reply. I'm okay. Can't talk yet. Soon. She hesitated, then slipped the phone into her bag. Not now. Not until she had a plan. A voice startled her. Carter. Amara turned. It was Dina, one of the night shift cleaners, older with sharp cheekbones and wary eyes. The one person in the building who'd ever offered Amara real advice. Boss wants you up in HR, Dina said. Now. Amara stiffened. Again? Dina leaned closer, lowering her voice. Word is Cross's people called. Said you disrespected her. They're pushing for a termination. It's going to happen today. Amara's stomach lurched. Thanks, she whispered. Dina gave a grim nod and moved on. Amara clenched her fists. This was faster than she expected. Maybe Victor had anticipated it too. The flash drive weighed heavy in her pocket, a secret grenade. She took a deep breath and started for the staff elevator. The HR office was a sterile box of beige walls and motivational posters, the kind that preached teamwork while enforcing obedience. Behind a glass desk sat Cynthia Gable, the human resources director, a thin, brittle woman with an artificial smile and an aura of perpetual inconvenience. "Miss Carter?" she greeted, gesturing to the lone chair across from her. "Please sit." Amara obeyed, folding her hands in her lap. "I won't waste your time," Cynthia began, sliding a form across the desk. "We've received a complaint this morning regarding an altercation with a valued guest. Effective immediately, your employment here is terminated." There it was, neat, cold, efficient. Cynthia continued, "We'll process your final paycheck and severance, which will be minimal given your tenure, and ask that you clean out your locker by the end of the day." Amara stared at the form. "I didn't do anything wrong," she said, her voice calm. Cynthia's expression didn't waver. "Miss Carter, this isn't up for discussion." A pause. Then Amara leaned back in her chair, eyes narrowing. "Did Genevieve Cross make the complaint herself?" she asked quietly. The HR director hesitated, flickering just for a second, enough to answer the question without speaking. "I see," Amara murmured. She reached into her jacket pocket, brushing her fingers against the flash drive, then thought better of it. Not yet, not here, not until every chess piece was aligned. "I'll pack my things," she said, standing. Cynthia managed a small, rehearsed sigh. "It's always unfortunate when these things happen." Amara didn't respond. She turned and walked out, her heartbeat steady, an unfamiliar calm settling over her. The walls of the mall closed in around her again, the gleam of luxury goods and perfume counters, shoppers moving in oblivious circles. But none of it mattered, because the storm had already begun. That evening, as the rain subsided into a fine mist, Amara made her way to a modest walk-up in East Harlem, where Marcus, Victor's legal advisor, waited. The apartment was sparsely furnished, a temporary safe house they'd arranged. Documents, photographs, and ledgers lay strewn across a table. "Good timing," Marcus said, opening the door for her. Amara tossed her jacket over a chair. "They fired me." Expected. Genevieve's predictable. "But you've got the flash drive." Amara pulled it out, setting it on the table. Marcus smiled. "Perfect. This is everything we need." He motioned for her to sit, pulling out a laptop. "Look, this isn't just about today's stunt. The Cross family's been bleeding Sterling Heights for years. Embezzlement, tax fraud, wage theft. And what they've done to the workers?" He clicked open files. Images of bruised faces, text messages of racist slurs from managers, incident reports buried or resolved internally. A surveillance clip played of a security guard berating a janitor for using the employee bathroom. Amara felt bile rise in her throat. "This place is a microcosm of everything wrong in this city," Marcus said. "Victor's tried legal channels for years, lawsuits buried, politicians bought. But this," he pointed to the screen, "this will go public." Amara swallowed hard. "At the gala." "Exactly. Big stage, big audience. No way to sweep it under the rug." Amara met his gaze. "Good," she said, "because I'm done cleaning up other people's messes." Marcus's grin widened, and outside Manhattan's lights blinked on one by one, a glittering skyline of power, about to learn the price of ignoring the people beneath their feet. The week that followed moved with the slow, electric tension of a storm gathering at the horizon. Every day, Amara woke before dawn, though she no longer had a job to rush to. She spent the hours in the East Harlem apartment, poring over documents Marcus handed her. Photographs of bruised workers, transcripts of buried complaints, accounting ledgers marked with crooked transactions. Names she recognized from whispered conversations in break rooms. Managers who made lives unbearable. Supervisors who propositioned desperate employees. Cross-family cronies collecting hush money. She learned things she hadn't wanted to learn. About her own mother. On a cold Thursday night, Marcus slid a thin manila envelope across the table toward her, his expression unreadable. "You should see this," he said. Amara hesitated before opening it. Inside were copies of employment records from over 20 years ago. A name caught her eye immediately. Yvonne Carter, her mother, hired in 1999 as a concierge at Sterling Heights Hotel and Residences, long before it became the marble and glass behemoth it was now. The file included performance reviews praising her work, commendations from guests, a note about her fluency in French and Spanish. Then came a transfer order, sudden and unexplained, from front desk concierge to housekeeping. Pay reduced, hours tripled. The file ended with a single line, typed neatly. Termination. Failure to maintain professional conduct with cross-family guests. Amara's throat closed. "What is this?" she whispered. Marcus leaned back, arms crossed. "Genevieve's mother, Victoria Cross, had your mother fired." Amara felt the world tilt slightly. "Why?" He hesitated. "Your mother, she filed a formal complaint, 20 years ago, against Lawrence Cross himself." Amara's eyes snapped up. "The old man," she breathed. Marcus nodded grimly. The pattern was always the same. Women of color in certain positions, harassed or mistreated, then punished for speaking up. But your mother didn't stay quiet. She filed an official report, and the next day, Victoria Cross had her removed. Demoted, then fired a month later when she wouldn't retract the complaint. Amara's pulse pounded in her ears. "She never told me," she said numbly. "Probably trying to protect you," Marcus replied quietly. "The Cross family made her life hell after that, blacklisted her from most luxury properties in the city. She spent years working cleaning jobs under different agencies. I think she kept it buried because it hurt too much." A thick, aching silence filled the room. The past unraveling like an old wound reopened. Amara swallowed hard, blinking back the sting behind her eyes. "And now Genevieve did the same to me." Marcus placed a steadying hand on the table. "And now you get to finish what your mother started." Amara took a shuddering breath. "I'm not going to let them bury this," she said, voice rough with fury. "Not this time." Marcus smiled. "Good, because we've got the gala layout, security blind spots, who's going to be where and when. And one very public surprise waiting for them." He handed her an invitation, embossed, gold-leafed, printed with her alias for safety, Miss A. Carter, guest of Mr. Victor Ellison. Amara ran a thumb over the name, feeling something old and small inside her loosen. "What about Genevieve?" Marcus's smile turned sharp. "She won't see it coming. Elsewhere in the city, in a penthouse 3 miles away, Genevieve Cross reclined in a velvet armchair as a private shopper laid out designer gowns for approval. The walls of her apartment gleamed with abstract paintings no one looked at, mirrors reflecting her own face back at her in 100 angles. She barely remembered the cleaner girl from last week, another mouthy little thing who'd forgotten her place. She'd told her father about the incident out of mild annoyance, enough to have the girl fired, make an example. It hadn't even warranted a post on her socials. The world would always be full of people like that, people who didn't belong in places like Sterling Heights, and she would always be the one to remind them. Genevieve chose a silver sequined gown and gestured for the others to be taken away. "The gala's going to be epic," she said to no one in particular. "The mayor's coming, that Forbes guy. And Daddy said Victor Ellison's making an appearance. Old man never shows up for these things." She gave herself one last approving glance in the mirror. "This year," she murmured, "it's going to be all about me." If only she'd known. If only she'd seen the name on the guest list she'd skimmed over. Because in less than 48 hours, the carefully constructed glass castle of the Cross family was going to shatter, and the girl she humiliated would be the one holding the stone. Friday dawned over Manhattan, the city waking to fog and the metallic scent of impending rain. But in a corner of East Harlem, beneath a flickering street lamp and weathered brick, A different storm was preparing to break. Amara sat at Marcus's kitchen table, bleary-eyed and wired from too much coffee, reviewing the final pieces of the puzzle they'd spent days assembling. The scope of it still staggered her. What began as a petty act of cruelty in a puddle had uncovered something far uglier. The Cross family's reach extended into every level of the Sterling Heights enterprise and beyond. City council members, union officials, even a pair of judges. Documents showing embezzlement from employee pensions, kickbacks for city permits, racial discrimination complaints systematically erased, whispers of hush money to families after workplace accidents, NDAs signed by desperate workers. And then there was the file simply labeled Project Echelon. Marcus opened it with a grimace. "This," he said, pointing to the screen, "is why Victor's been waiting for years to strike." Cross Holdings has been funneling charity gala donations through a shell nonprofit, Echelon Human Capital. On paper, a diversity initiative. Amara scanned the documents, financial records, a breakdown of Echelon's expenditures. "Not a single scholarship awarded," she muttered. "Not one," Marcus confirmed. Echelon's been a front to launder millions in tax-deductible donations back into Cross family investments. Real estate, offshore accounts, private luxury construction projects. Amara's stomach turned, and every time someone in the company complained, they were buried, fired, or worse. Her gaze fell on an incident report from 2018, a maintenance worker injured by faulty equipment, his complaint ignored, a scrawled note in the margin. Problematic. Watch list. She knew that man. Lamar. His limp never fully healed. A cold fury rooted in her chest. This wasn't just about her mother, or the mud, or her own lost job. It was about decades of bodies stacked behind velvet ropes. "Who else knows about this?" she asked. Marcus exchanged a glance with Victor Ellison, who'd arrived quietly an hour earlier and now stood by the window watching dawn lighten the city skyline. "3 people besides us," Marcus said, "and one of them runs building security. An ally? A man with a debt to pay," Victor spoke at last. His voice was low, roughened by the years. His brother was one of the Cross family's first scapegoats. Got blamed for a fire in '97 that was really their own insurance fraud. Amara gripped the edge of the table. "And you're sure he's in?" Victor turned, his dark gaze steady. "He's the one who handed us this," he said, placing a USB drive on the table. "Live audio from tomorrow night's gala surveillance room. The Cross family's private conversations. No filter." Amara stared at the tiny object. It didn't look like much, a simple piece of plastic and metal, but it felt like a weapon. Marcus exhaled. "Between this, the financial records, the pension theft, and the Echelon fraud, we have them. Tonight we finalize it, tomorrow the world watches it burn." Across the city, Genevieve Cross was wrapping up final fittings for the gala, oblivious. She paced the marble floor of her father's penthouse suite, dictating guest list adjustments. "No press near the family table," she instructed, "and make sure the DJ knows. No hip-hop after 10. This isn't Brooklyn." The irony would be lost on her, even if someone explained it. Her mother, Victoria Cross, read through a sheaf of spreadsheets detailing Echelon's so-called community investments. She glanced up. "Have you handled that cleaning girl situation?" Genevieve waved a manicured hand. "Fired her last week. Known issue." Victoria's lips twitched into something like a smile. "Good," she murmured. "We can't afford distractions." Neither of them noticed the young assistant by the door, pretending to review a seating chart on her tablet, while mentally noting every word. Back in Harlem, Amara made one final request before the meeting broke up. "I need to see it," she said. "The footage." From that day, Marcus hesitated, then slid a laptop toward her. A single security camera feed played. Her mother, Yvonne Carter, 20 years younger, standing at the front desk, face tight with rage as she argued with a man in a tailored suit. Lawrence Cross. The audio was crackly but clear enough. "You'll regret this," he hissed. I don't care, Yvonne shot back. You won't touch me or anyone else again. 30 minutes later, she'd been demoted. By nightfall, fired. Amara watched the clip twice. Then, once more. Victor's voice broke the silence. She was braver than most. Amara nodded, her throat tight. She didn't have backup, I do. She rose, pocketing the USB drive. Tomorrow, it ends. Victor gave her a small, grim smile. No, he said. Tomorrow, it begins. The night air tasted of wet asphalt and expensive perfume. The Cross Foundation Charity Gala was the kind of event that made city headlines before it even began. A self-congratulatory gathering of old money, new money, and those desperate to orbit either. Sterling Heights' atrium had been transformed into a glittering cathedral of opulence. Strings of white lights threaded through glass ceilings, a sea of crystal chandeliers reflected in polished floors, and an orchestra murmuring through minor symphonies. Amara arrived alone, draped in a sleek, backless black gown Victor's assistant had procured for her. It wasn't hers, but it fit her better than anything she'd ever owned. The doorman barely looked at her invitation before waving her inside. The irony wasn't lost on her. For years she'd mopped these floors. Now she entered through the front, head high, invisible in a different way, because people like Genevieve never noticed the girl at the edges of their world until it was too late. Inside, she spotted Marcus by the bar, suited and composed, already nursing a glass of bourbon. The plan was simple, elegant, ruthless. At precisely 9:45 p.m., the surveillance room would be hijacked by Victor's ally in security. Live feeds from private cameras and conversation mics, including those at the Cross family table, would broadcast onto the massive projection screens meant for gala donors. The files would be released to the press moments later, but the first blow had to be public, personal, and it would come from her. She slipped through the crowd unnoticed, a blur of dark silk and sharp eyes. She passed city councilmen laughing at jokes about zoning ordinances, real estate developers toasting tax loopholes. And there, in the center of it all, beneath the largest chandelier, sat the Cross dynasty. Genevieve sparkled in a gown of liquid silver, her mother Victoria beside her in emerald satin. Lawrence Cross, ghost-pale and brittle, still ruled the table like an emperor in exile. Amara's stomach coiled. Victor's voice hummed softly in the earpiece concealed in her hair. Positioned? She tapped twice on her clutch in response. Good, Victor murmured. Showtime in 2. Amara's pulse was steady. She waited, letting her gaze wander, until she caught sight of Genevieve's glass of wine lifted in a toast. She stepped forward. Miss Cross, she said, her voice cutting clean through the ambient hum. Genevieve blinked, confused at the stranger addressing her. Yes? The irritation already creeping in. Amara smiled. You may not remember me, but you should. Something about her tone tugged at a thread in Genevieve's memory. The way the girl stood, her face unreadable, her voice without fear. You work here? Genevieve asked, eyes narrowing. No, Amara replied evenly. Not anymore. Genevieve's sneer formed before the words. Well, if you're here begging for charity, darling, the line starts outside. The first image hit the screen behind her. A photo of a bruised maintenance worker. Date stamped. Sterling Heights logo in the corner. Then another. A snippet of financial records showing hundreds of thousands of dollars funneled from employee retirement funds into a shell company. Gasps rippled through the crowd. What the? Lawrence Cross turned, color draining from his face. Genevieve spun around as more images appeared. Emails with her own name attached to incident cover-ups. Footage of Victoria ordering the deletion of harassment reports. And finally, audio, her own voice. You people are so sensitive. The puddle, the laughter, the cruel glee. In crystal clear sound, the room froze. Guests shifting uncomfortably, some turning away. Phones appeared, recording. Genevieve shot to her feet. Who's doing this? She screeched. Shut it off! Shut it off now! Too late. The final image was a family tree graphic, tracing Cross Holdings' charity donations straight to offshore accounts. Project Echelon laid bare in numbers and names. Amara felt Victor's voice in her ear again. Phase 2. Marcus stepped forward, raising a microphone at the edge of the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice like gravel, steady, unyielding. "Thank you for your generous attendance. But tonight, we'd like to introduce someone far more deserving of this spotlight." He gestured toward Amara. Every eye turned. For a heartbeat, she hesitated, and then stepped up onto the stage. Her voice didn't tremble. "My name is Amara Carter," she said. "Some of you may have known me as the girl who mopped your floors, or fetched your wine, or smiled while you humiliated me." A flicker of motion, Genevieve trying to leave, stopped by security now blocking every exit. "But what you didn't know," Amara continued, gaze sweeping the room, "is that I wasn't alone. I stand here for the countless others you discarded, exploited, and erased." The room held its breath. Amara lifted the flash drive high. "And this," she declared, "is everything you tried to bury." Applause didn't come instantly. It came slowly, from the edges, from the kitchen staff peeking from the service doors, from employees on balconies, from Victor, standing now at the back of the room. Then it surged like a tide. The Cross family sat stunned, their world collapsing. And Amara Carter, daughter of Yvonne, survivor of 1,000 small violences, stood in the heart of it, not as a victim, but as an architect of their downfall. Tomorrow the newspapers would run the headlines. But tonight belonged to her. The aftermath didn't come like an explosion. It came like a suffocating flood, wave after wave of consequences rippling outward from the center of the atrium. The applause that had begun hesitantly among the workers swelled until it filled the cavernous space, drowning out Genevieve's shrill, panicked orders and Lawrence Cross's hoarse demands for someone, anyone, to shut down the screens. But it was too late. The broadcast had already gone live on Sterling Heights' public YouTube channel, scheduled that very evening for a live stream of the gala. More than 30,000 viewers were watching, and counting. On screen, evidence scrolled in relentless silence. Cross-family tax fraud, audio of racist slurs from managers, falsified safety records, and a damning confession from a private conversation Victoria Cross had no idea had ever been recorded. "It's not about charity," her voice crackled through the speakers. "It's about control. Keep the colored help grateful, desperate, and easy to replace." A collective, horrified breath swept the room. More guests left their seats, some in stunned retreat toward exits now guarded by Victor's private security team, there not to imprison, but to make certain the Cross family couldn't flee the reckoning. Amara remained at the front, her hands steady, though her heart pounded so hard it made her vision pulse. Victor's voice spoke in her ear again. "City desk at the Chronicle wants a statement from you," he said. "Now." "They'll run it by midnight." Amara nodded subtly and raised the mic again. "I want to say this to every person who's ever mopped a floor here, served a drink here, cleaned up after your parties," she said, her voice clear and carrying to the farthest corners. "We see you, and starting tonight, this city will too." A murmur of agreement rose from the workers clustered in the doorways, and then a single voice called out, "To Yvonne Carter!" Amara turned sharply. It was Lamar, the maintenance worker whose injury file she'd found. He stood with his limp, fists clenched, eyes gleaming. Others took up the call. "To Yvonne! To everyone they buried!" The room that had once belonged to wealth and cruelty now belonged to those it had crushed. Genevieve, red-faced and trembling, tried again to reclaim the room. "Daddy, do something!" she hissed. But Lawrence Cross was beyond salvaging. His face was ashen, mouth working without sound as though trying to conjure old power in a room that no longer obeyed him. Victoria's carefully composed mask cracked. She stood, voice steely. "You people don't know who you're dealing with. This little stunt won't last. You'll see." Victor stepped forward then, his presence shifting the air. "Oh, I know exactly who I'm dealing with," he said, calm and unhurried. "And as of this morning, your family no longer owns controlling interest in Sterling Heights. I do." Gasps broke out like sudden thunder. Genevieve staggered back, grabbing at the nearest chair. What? I bought out your board, Victor went on. Every silent partner you never bothered to respect. Every minority stakeholder you marginalized. You made it easy, Victoria. All it took was one final scandal. This, he gestured toward the screen, where footage of Cross Holdings' offshore accounts still flickered. This, he said softly, is your legacy. Lawrence Cross let out a sound somewhere between a groan and a plea. Victoria's face twisted into something cold and lethal. This is illegal. You'll regret this, Ellison. Victor smiled without warmth. I already don't. He turned to Amara. The floor's yours, Miss Carter. Amara took one last breath. She thought of her mother, of long nights working extra shifts, of unpaid bills, of watching her spirit hollow out under the weight of a world that didn't care. No one gets to decide your worth but you, Amara said to the room. And tonight we don't ask for a seat at the table anymore. We build our own. The standing ovation came not from the rich, but from the servers, janitors, dishwashers, security staff. A tidal wave of applause, cheers, and tears. Cameras recorded it all. Social feeds lit up in real time. Amara Carter trended worldwide. As the Cross family was quietly escorted from the atrium, not in cuffs yet, but under the weight of approaching investigations, Amara stepped down from the stage. Lamar caught her shoulder, squeezing it hard. Your mother would have been proud. Amara felt her throat tighten. She nodded once, a silent promise. Across the room, Marcus approached with his phone raised. It's done, he murmured. State Attorney's Office moving in tomorrow. IRS is already drafting subpoenas. And the Chronicle's front page headline? He turned the screen to show her. The Empire Falls. Cross family exposed by former cleaner. Amara closed her eyes for a heartbeat, letting the weight of it all settle. Then she opened them. There was still work to do. But for the first time in a very long time, the fight felt winnable. The dawn after the gala broke soft and unassuming, as if the city itself hadn't witnessed the dismantling of one of its oldest dynasties. But beneath the placid sky, change moved fast, fierce, and unstoppable. By 7 a.m., news vans lined the curb outside Sterling Heights. Reporters jostled for position, barking updates into microphones about financial crimes, harassment cover-ups, and the sudden spectacular fall of the Cross family empire. Genevieve's carefully curated social accounts were scrubbed overnight, her management team frantically issuing vague statements about deep reflection and corporate restructuring. But it was too late. The court of public opinion had already rendered its verdict. Inside the building, workers gathered in groups, in locker rooms, supply closets, maintenance corridors, watching phone screens as live news coverage rolled on. Amara Carter, they whispered. The name felt like a chant, passed from one blue-collar voice to the next, a spark of something that tasted like justice. In the penthouse suite that once belonged to Victoria Cross, Victor Ellison sat at the head of the long marble conference table, no longer an outsider peering in. Documents lay spread before him, ownership transfers, pending litigation notices, emergency board decisions. But he was only waiting for one thing. At exactly 8:30 a.m., Amara stepped through the doors. No longer in borrowed silk or stained uniforms. She wore a simple black jacket, dark jeans, her hair loose around her shoulders. The air around her had changed, sharper, heavier, like the edge of a blade that finally remembered it was a weapon. Victor rose, gesturing to a seat beside him. Morning, Miss Carter. Morning. They didn't waste words. Not now. Victor slid a slim leather folder across the table. And here's the proposal, he said. A fund, initial investment of $10 million for displaced employees, workplace safety programs, and legal aid for harassment cases. Joint oversight committee made up of workers, not execs. Amara flipped through the pages. The numbers felt surreal, like seeing a world she was told never belonged to her suddenly shift. You want me to run it? Victor shook his head. I want you to build it, he said, on your terms. Amara's chest tightened. I'm not a lawyer or an exec. You're exactly what this place needs, Victor cut in. Someone who remembers what it's like on the other side of the table. Someone they can trust. A long pause. Amara ran a hand over the folder, the weight of it heavy, and thought of her mother's calloused hands, of nights sitting with Talia over cheap takeout, plotting futures they didn't believe in. "I'll do it," she said quietly, but not alone. The other workers, Lamar, Dina, the kitchen crews, they're in this too. Victor smiled, a rare warmth in it. Of course. A knock at the door broke the moment. Marcus entered, phone in hand. "State attorney's press conference in 30, he said. "Cross-family indictment imminent. They'll be seized before lunch." Victor gave a satisfied nod. "And Genevieve?" Amara asked. Marcus's grin was sharp. "House arrest. Financial accounts frozen. She's looking at federal charges for embezzlement, fraud, and obstruction." Amara felt no satisfaction at the thought of Genevieve in cuffs. What she wanted was bigger than revenge. She wanted the whole machine dismantled. "I don't care about her," she said. "I care about what comes after." Marcus's expression softened. "You'll get it, starting now." By noon, the Sterling Heights atrium reopened. Not for another gala, but for an impromptu workers' assembly. Janitors, maintenance crews, retail clerks, and hotel staff gathered under the same glass ceilings where they'd once been expected to stay silent. Amara stood before them, not above, but among, reading aloud the first set of reforms: paid medical leave, independent harassment investigations, a permanent memorial to the workers who'd died or been maimed under cross-family management. When she finished, the room erupted in applause, and then Lamar stepped forward. "I got something for you," he said, digging into his jacket pocket. It was a faded photograph. A young Yvonne Carter in her concierge uniform, standing at the same atrium decades ago, chin lifted, unbroken. "She started it," he said. "You finished it." Amara's throat closed. She took the photo carefully, like it was made of glass. "Not finished," she murmured. "Just started." Outside, the news cameras rolled. But none of them captured the most important moment. The quiet, fierce promise in that room. The understanding that for the first time, they weren't just surviving. They were claiming what was theirs. And nothing, no family name or old money empire, would ever steal it again. The weeks that followed rewrote the city's unspoken laws. The cross-family name was stripped from Sterling Heights' marble facade within days. The same towering letters that had gleamed over Fifth Avenue for decades were unceremoniously dismantled under a gray morning sky, watched by a crowd of workers, reporters, and curious passers-by. A video of the moment. One of the maintenance crew standing in his coveralls holding the final C like a trophy, went viral within hours. By then, Genevieve Cross was a ghost. Her social media accounts shuttered, her once lavish lifestyle reduced to a penthouse apartment under house arrest. Lawyers streaming in and out like vultures circling a carcass. Charges stacked against her like bricks. Embezzlement, labor law violations, obstruction of justice. Her father, Lawrence, suffered a minor stroke the day after his indictment. Victoria Cross, ever the strategist, fled to a private estate in the Hamptons before being subpoenaed. But none of them mattered anymore. The power they once held, built on the backs of the unseen and unacknowledged, was gone. Amara Carter, the girl they'd humiliated, the cleaner no one noticed, was everywhere now. Not as a martyr or a viral headline, but as a leader. The fund Victor had promised launched under a new name, the Yvonne Carter Foundation for Workers' Rights. Amara insisted on it. The foundation offered legal aid, emergency housing assistance, mental health services, and advocacy workshops for service and retail workers across the city. What began as a local project expanded rapidly. Unions, advocacy groups, and even a handful of courageous city council members joined. Amara didn't become a CEO. She refused the title. "I'm not managing people," she told Victor in one of their final meetings before he stepped down, and handed full operational control to Marcus and the Workers' Oversight Council. "I'm building something they can own." Victor, now a quieter presence, simply nodded, a rare softness in his weathered face. "That's the whole point," he said. "That it doesn't need to be you forever. That it belongs to them." And it did. Within 6 months, workplace reforms swept not only through Sterling Heights but other properties previously owned by Cross Holdings. Employee turnover dropped, lawsuits surfaced, followed by settlements. Workers from other parts of the city, hotel maids, fast food employees, security guards, began contacting the foundation for help. What began as retaliation for a petty act of cruelty ignited something far larger. The gala, once a yearly spectacle of wealth and manufactured benevolence, was replaced by an annual workers' assembly, held in the same atrium, now renamed the Carter Hall. It wasn't flawless. There were fights, failures, people who resisted change, who clung to the old rules like lifeboats. But the difference now was that someone stood at the table, someone like Amara. One rainy afternoon, almost a year to the day since that first wave of muddy waters struck her legs, Amara found herself walking the old service corridors of Sterling Heights. Not out of nostalgia, but because Lamar insisted the new break room mural was finally done. The hallway walls had changed. No more chipped paint or employees-only signs meant to segregate. She stepped into the freshly painted room. A sprawling mural stretched across the back wall, faces of cleaners, janitors, cashiers, bellhops, and in the center, Yvonne Carter, smiling in her crisp concierge uniform. Below it, a quote in bold letters, "They tried to bury us. They didn't know we were seeds." Amara swallowed the lump in her throat. Lamar, standing nearby with his arm in a sling from an old injury, raised a coffee cup toward her. "You did it, kid." She shook her head. "We did." The hum of voices filled the room, laughter, arguments, life, and for the first time in a long, blood-stained, unforgiving city, it felt like belonging. The rain outside carried on, but inside, something permanent, something undeniable had taken root. They weren't going anywhere. The city would remember the Cross family's collapse as a scandal, a corporate cautionary tale. But for those who lived in the margins, for the workers who scrubbed its floors and hauled its waste, the real story was quieter, richer, heavier. It was about the unclaimed names on maintenance logs, the unreported injuries, the stolen paychecks. About what happens when the world's invisible people refuse invisibility. Amara Carter's story didn't end with victory, because victory was never a finish line. It was a beginning. The proof that no matter how small the gesture, a chin lifted in the rain, a job done with dignity, a refusal to swallow one more injustice, it mattered. Every act of survival, of defiance, was a brick in something greater. And though the marble walls of Sterling Heights gleamed just as bright, something fundamental had shifted. A woman who once walked through those doors afraid of being noticed now walked without fear, not because the world had grown kinder, but because she, and those who stood with her, had learned to make their own kind of power, and there would be no turning back.